As I speak tonight, the government of the United States is closed. There is no funding for the United States government. We have people working, but they're not being paid. Many workers have been furloughed. Programs have been cut back. Even our military. Food support. Food support for babies. Cut off. The government has no funding. And what's it been, 27 days? This happens because of Senate rules that go back more than 100 years. You see, in the United States Senate, debate is basically unlimited. Senators can speak at length, delay votes, and force compromise through persistence. But there is one rule, one procedure that can bring all that to an end. It's called cloture. Cloture is the formal process of ending debate and moving a bill, nomination, or motion to a final vote. It is the Senate's answer to the filibuster. It's constitutional safety valve that balances free debate with the need to act. The word cloture comes from the French word clôture, meaning closure or the act of closing. In the Senate, it refers to the process of cutting off debate. When a senator files a motion for cloture, they're asking the Senate to decide, should we keep debating or should we vote? If the Senate votes to invoke cloture, debate on the measure must end after a set period, usually 30 additional hours, and then the Senate proceeds to a final vote. It sounds simple. But cloture has shaped some of the most important and most bitter legislative battles in American history. For the first 128 years of the Republic, the Senate had no formal way to end debate. That meant any determined group of senators could hold the floor indefinitely, blocking a vote, a tactic that came to be known as the filibuster. In the early 1900s, as debates grew longer and more political frustration mounted, the breaking point came during World War I. In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for authority to arm American merchant ships against German submarines. A small group of isolationist senators filibustered the bill until the clock ran out. An angry Wilson denounced them as, quote, a little group of willful men who rendered the government helpless and contemptible. The public agreed, and the Senate responded on March 8, 1917. The Senate adopted Rule 22, establishing cloture. It allowed 2/3 of senators present and voting to cut off debate. For the first time, the Senate could formally say, enough talk, let's vote. For the first several years, cloture was rarely used. In fact, from 1917 to 1960, it was successfully invoked only 5 times. Senators continued to prize unlimited debate as a symbol of minority rights and deliberation. The culture of the Senate prized persuasion, not coercion. And as civil rights became the dominant issue of the mid-20th century, cloture became the battlefield for America's conscience. Southern senators repeatedly used the filibuster to block civil rights legislation, keeping bills from even coming to a vote. In 1964, after a 60-day filibuster, the Senate faced a defining moment, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Majority Leader Mike Mansfield and Republican leader Everett Dirksen worked together to gather enough votes to invoke cloture. Dirksen told his colleagues, America grows, America changes, and on the civil rights issue, we must rise with the occasion. It should be pointed out that a larger percentage of Republicans in Congress voted for the Civil Rights Act than Democrats. On June 10, 1964, the Senate voted 71 to 29 to invoke cloture, the first time in history that cloture had been used successfully on a civil rights bill. It ended the filibuster and cleared the way for the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Act. The moment cemented cloture as both a procedural and moral instrument, a way to ensure that obstruction could not permanently silence change. Even after 1964, the high threshold of cloture, 2/3 of those present and voting, remained difficult to achieve. In 1975, amid frustration over gridlock and procedural abuse, the Senate lowered the requirement to 3/5 of the entire Senate, or 60 votes if all senators are present. The 60-vote rule remains the standard for most legislation today. Senator Walter Mondale argued that the ability of a minority to frustrate the majority should not be without limit. At the same time, opponents warned that lowering the threshold would damage the Senate's identity as the world's greatest deliberative body. The compromise, 60 votes, was meant to preserve deliberation while allowing the majority to govern. Over time, cloture became central to nearly every major Senate debate. Originally, invoking cloture was rare, a last resort. Today, it has become routine. In recent decades, the minority party has used the threat of filibuster so frequently that nearly every significant bill requires 60 votes to advance. As a result, cloture votes are now seen as a test of whether a bill has enough bipartisan support to survive. This evolution has sparked ongoing debate. Has cloture saved the Senate or paralyzed it? The nuclear option and changing rules. Frustration with gridlock has led both parties to modify cloture rules for certain votes. In 2013, the Senate, under Majority Leader Harry Reid, used what became known as the nuclear option. By a simple majority vote, the Senate reinterpreted its rules to allow cloture on executive and judicial nominations except for the Supreme Court, with just 51 votes, a simple majority. Republicans strongly objected, but in 2017 they used the same tactic. Under Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Senate extended the rule to Supreme Court nominations, confirming Justice Neil Gorsuch with a simple majority. Today, only legislation still requires the traditional 60-vote threshold. These changes have made it easier to confirm president's nominees, but they've also weakened the minority's ability to delay or demand compromise. When a senator files a motion for cloture, at least 16 senators must sign the petition. 2 days later, the Senate votes. If 60 senators vote yes, cloture is invoked. Debate continues for up to 30 more hours, during which senators may speak, offer limited amendments, or make statements. After that time expires, the Senate must vote on the bill or nomination itself. Cloture then doesn't silence debate instantly, it simply sets an end point. Supporters of the 60-vote rule say cloture protects the Senate's unique role, forcing cooperation, protecting minority rights, and preventing hasty decisions. Senator Joe Manchin has said the filibuster is the only thing that prevents total insanity in Washington. Opponents argue that cloture has become a tool of obstruction, empowering a minority to block even wildly supported measures. President Joe Biden, a former senator, has said democracy is supposed to function, not be constantly held hostage by procedural tactics. Progressive lawmakers, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, have called for eliminating or reforming the filibuster, saying that the 60-vote requirement allows a minority to veto the majority's will. Interestingly, the U.S. Constitution says nothing about filibusters or cloture. Article 1, Section 5 simply gives each chamber the power to determine the rules of its proceedings. That means cloture exists entirely by Senate rule, not by constitutional mandate. As a result, it can be changed at any time by a majority vote, though doing so would fundamentally reshape how the Senate operates. The framers expected the Senate to be a deliberative, but not immovable. Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist number 22, warned that requiring more than a majority to act could mean, quote, the fundamental principle of free government would be reversed. The minority would control the majority, close quote. That warning continues to echo today. Yep, today when the government's closed. Over more than a century, cloture has evolved from a rare emergency measure into the defining feature of the Senate. It has broken historic filibusters from civil rights to judicial nominations, and at times it has also deepened partisan divides. Whether seen as a shield for minority rights or a weapon of obstruction, cloture remains the mechanism by which the Senate decides when does debate end and when does democracy move forward. I want to make sure you understand that a cloture vote is not dispositive. You can vote for cloture, ending debate, calling for the vote, and still vote against the bill. You can follow procedures to move the government forward and still be against the specific action. At best, cloture ensures that the Senate remains both deliberative and decisive, a body that can talk endlessly but also act when the time comes. At its worst, it can freeze progress and frustrate the will of the majority. In our current case, the bill was passed by the House, sent to the Senate. All 52 Republican senators, a majority of the Senate, are prepared to vote to continue funding the government as it was the day before the bill came up. But only 55 senators have voted for cloture. The Republicans, 52, plus 2 Democrats and 1 independent. So today, the debate over cloture and over how much debate is enough will continue to define the balance between liberty and efficiency in American democracy. Is 27 days long enough to debate this issue? Because in the end, cloture isn't just a rule, a procedure. It's a test of whether the Senate can govern. I'm Bruce Alton Carlson. If you'd like more on the Constitution and how the government works, please like and subscribe. If you have opinions on cloture and possibly the closing of the government, please comment. Hope to see you back here soon.